And then I'm going to share my screen. All right. All right, so we are going to talk about JavaScript. So I must make an admission. I am not a designer. So CSS3 and designing, that part of my logical mind it's probably, if you look at the full stack, it is my weakest, and I don't spend enough time up there. And I would love to, if I had time, to sit and build beautiful interfaces. But I'm really good at database work. I'm good at programming. I'm good at all those technologies. The styling itself is something that I need to get better at. I would basically defer to like Bootstrap and just use something that's already built. However, JavaScript is not static. This is where your forms and your web pages come to life, because you are going to be learning to add some type of interaction to your forms and some type of logic to your pages. So we will slowly step into this. We'll give a light overview of history of JavaScript, what it is, browser debugging tools, and we're going to talk about a little bit about the console and how to console log and syntax, some start to syntax examples, and then how we can actually incorporate JavaScript into our current pages. So the history of JavaScript, we talk so much about this static web. And remember, we talked about CERN and how they had those initial markup languages, and all we were doing was hyperlinking, and yeah, there wasn't much activity to it aside from linking documents and showing images and those type of things. There wasn't a whole lot of logic around those pages. So prior to JavaScript, web pages were really static, HTML, CSS, those, and with the occasional plugin and Java applet. We had those concept, have to find those older sites, they're so funny. Those animated GIFs, remember those animated GIFs of the construction worker, trying to animate the sledgehammer to try to say that the site's under construction, those kind of things. You would have a picture do that. So HTML and CSS are those markup languages, and markup languages are easy to describe, define the elements of the document. Like in our project, we're just defining those elements and describing them with no interactivity. So this is what Google looked like a long time ago. Very flat, couple buttons, a couple links. There wasn't much going on there. There certainly really wasn't much, page reloading and those kind of things, and fast interactivity of searching and all those things. It was really just a hyperlink kind of link of the web, right? And you could say it is. You could say Google, the main engine, is sort of like that, but if you look at what they've added, like Google Maps and GPS and all of those types of things, are highly interactive and very, very well written, and many pieces to it. There's a lot going on these days. So JavaScript was born. It was born, and JavaScript was created in 10 days. And if you know what Java is not to be confused with JavaScript, even though they may sound the same. This certainly is not Java. It's pretty much the exact opposite. Created in 10 days by this fellow here, Brendan Eck, working on Netscape Navigator. And if you don't know what Netscape Navigator was, I'll have to pull up an old school picture of what it was. That was the original browser. And I remember that was the only browser. I remember that's the one I mean, it may not be the only one, but I remember that was the one I started with. Until Microsoft came aboard, and so it was one of the first internet browser in 1995, and it was a grayscale kind of old Windows 3.1 looking application. I'm gonna dig up a screenshot. I have to. Why not? We have the internet here. Why not take a look at it? So Netscape Navigator original. Let's take a look at this. Hopefully so it looks something like that, and I remember this. I sort of remember this. It looked like this. This is what your search engine looked like. Sorry. it looked like this window here. This is what it would look like when you were searching the web. Really, 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 well, I mean, at the time it was probably really futuristic, but for us, when we look at it, we can almost kind of laugh now when we see what that kind of interface looks like, right? It kind of looks like our HTML elements without any styling to it, but even to build something like this, you can imagine it would, it takes a little bit of know-how just for the interface itself, but that's what we had to look at. We would type in here, we have a home button, reload, and then of course, kick off a search and stop it. So that was the first browser, and it was nicknamed Mocha during development. Ultimately named, sorry, backtracking. Netscape Navigator was born. There was a war of browsers that happened between Microsoft. Microsoft started packaging its own browser in Windows operating system called obviously Explorer. Internet Explorer. Eventually putting Netscape out of business, completely squashing them like an evil empire. And then there was a whole legal lawsuit with the government and all of that, right? But if you do kind of notice, in a way, there's a little bit of a kind of reveal a little bit, or kind of what is to come. Eventually those folks in Netscape eventually became Firefox, 20 years later. So they didn't actually, they kind of were reborn in a sense later on. But during this time, they did create this JavaScript language in 10 days, which is pretty incredible if you really know how powerful it is. It's quite incredible. It was 10 days. It was JavaScript. It was nicknamed Mocha during development. Ultimately named JavaScript to piggyback off Java, because Java was popular at the time. So they wanted to piggyback off the language. It was originally called also it's called Mocha Script. I think it was called LiveScript. There's a bunch of ones, but they figured, okay, well, Java's popular and everybody knows what Java is, so let's just call ourselves JavaScript because we're a script language. But these days it's often confused a lot. So if you are starting out programming at this point in time, well, welcome, but we need to know what a programming language is. So let's be kind of clear on it. It's JavaScript is a programming language. Programming languages are used to communicate instructions to the machine, by various ways. Programming languages are used to communicate. Oh, I had a double point there. They can control the behavior of a machine and express algorithms, right? So a way of expressing our algorithms down, there's many ways of, basically when we use very low-level languages, and when we use Node.js, there's ways of kind of compressing down or compiling down, translating down these instructions all the way down to the machine itself. And our JavaScript code is not going to be interpreted at the lowest level in this way. It gets compiled down by various engines and compilers. But from our way, it was designed in a way so humans can code in a way that is intuitive in the sense to them, instead of getting into the very deep kind of assembly kind of language that machines understand. So we talked about W3C, I believe, which was the organization for the web, www and HTML standards, CSS standards, but there is one for JavaScript called ECMA International, in fact. So we know that JavaScript, often referred to as JS as well, high-level, dynamic, untyped, interpreted programming language originally created for browsers. Now that's a lot to actually say. If you really, when you finally learn all about the technologies we're going to use, when you look at that, it means a lot. It's dynamic. It is very dynamic. Untyped, and we'll understand what that means, as opposed to strongly typed. Interpreted programming language created originally for web browsers. Yeah, it was originally only for web browsers, and when you thought about JavaScript, it was only for the web. But in recent years, it has exploded so much that it is now used server-side coding for JavaScript because of its popularity, server-side, client-side, webs. Even in the database, we have ways of programming in JavaScript to interact with the database. Now, remember, there's more to it than that to make it understand the JavaScript syntax, but because of the popularity, it's kind of translated down through the layers of a full stack development application. So ECMA International is an international nonprofit standard organization. So the full name, I always forget what it is, European Computer Manufacturers Association. I didn't even know that till I really looked at that again. ECMAScript, ES scripting specification. So we are going to talk later on at some point about ES6, and you'll hear different things like ES6, ES5, ES 2015, ES20. They're all interchangeable, and they all kind of refer to the standard of that JavaScript versioning. So some newer versions of JavaScript have come out with new syntax and new types of things to make things more easier for us, built-in features and utilities, those kind of things. So if you hear ECMAScript or ES6, we're kind of referring back to the JavaScript version in a way. Yes, somebody has a question. Go ahead.
Mike, so this ECMAScript, right? This is actually like the very first time I'm hearing about this. Is this like used much in the market?
So it's basically a way of saying ECMAScript is the newest version of JavaScript. ECMAScript is JavaScript. It's like the standards way of saying what JavaScript is, and you refer back. Okay, JavaScript. Well, okay, I'll give context. Oh, I'm programming in JavaScript at work. Okay, well, are you using ES6? Someone will say, what do you mean ES6? Well, that's the latest version of JavaScript at 2015 point in time. And inside in ES6, there's a whole bunch of new features that are available to you that you didn't normally have with vanilla JavaScript, older versions of JavaScript. In fact, the older browsers only will not understand the newer versions of ECMA.
So in a way, it's just as we have Microsoft Windows and then several versions like 10, Professional, Home, Ultimate, and all that. In a similar way, we have JavaScript, and the different versions are ES6 and the previous ones. Is that somewhat accurate? Or
Yes, it's no different than CSS1, CSS 2.5, CSS3. Again, we're dealing with the governing body here, so it's very confusing as well, because you will hear, oh, I'm on ES 2015. Well, I'm on ES6. Well, they're the same thing. ES6 came out in 2015, but it got very convoluted at some point. Sometimes they have problems with versioning. If it's the first time you've heard about this, don't worry. I'm giving you the full definition, but you will hear ES floating around with a number, and it kind of refers back to the versioning of that JavaScript. Again, this is a governing body to kind of make sure that there is some kind of standard out there that all web browsers need to adhere to. And the newer versions of Chrome will only understand some of the very latest features, whereas IE6 will completely break. Yes, go ahead. If somebody has a question, otherwise I'll move on. All right, so that is that. ES6. So when we're talking about debugging tools, I think we've already really talked about them already. We kind of explored them, but we've only really looked at the design portions of those debugging those tools for Chrome developer tools. We didn't go into debugging. So there is a whole other panel that is used for debugging. You can step through all of the code, and this is what you would do eventually when you get to be a developer, if that is your goal. If it's not your goal, it's just good to know about it. But on all modern browsers, Chrome, Firefox, Microsoft Edge, support the web tools to allow web developers to test and debug their code. And there's a lot of other extensions and plugins needed that you can definitely look into. So these tools allow for us or developers to work with all these technologies. We've already explored HTML. We've already explored CSS. You'll hear the DOM quite a bit. And that DOM refers to that element, the HTML tree, the document called the document object tree. So we already established that HTML is viewed as a tree, but inside of the browser, it kind of has an object model. So that tree is kind of like an object tree. No different than what a tree may look like, but it treats it as a tree of objects, which JavaScript, again, in the same way with selectors with CSS, JavaScript in a way can traverse that DOM. And there's different ways of, there's a whole science around rendering. Like, how do we render? Different frameworks render faster than others. Why is that? Why is old school technologies, why does it kick off a whole page reload? And then why does the newer frameworks such as React, why are they so fast? And it all deals with that rendering of that tree and all the technologies around it. And that's you can traverse some of that in DevTools. JavaScript and other components are handled by the web browser. So we've explored the web browser. I always reference Chrome tools, but hold on for a second here. Sorry, I have a call coming in, but it's probably a telemarketer. Right, Chrome tools. We always refer to them just because I like them, but don't let me persuade you into using Chrome tools. Internet Explorer Edge has its own tool set if you like that. Firefox also has a different one as well. It's all on your, and I said before, you may be flipping between all browsers on a project to see how they all render. So it's built directly into the browser, and you can edit pages quickly and on the fly, as we know. Right, we looked at a few things already, right? We already looked at some sites. So if it doesn't matter what site we're on, really, we could quickly, this is not a very exciting site, but all right, well, let's look at something a little better. Let's look at Netflix. Right, I don't know, just because it has movies in the background, it's a little bit more interesting, maybe. All right, so we've already looked at, so let me, by the way, if you go to this little 3 dots here, you can control where you want to dock your DevTools. I have it beside, but you can put it below. So in this view, you can kind of look at it in this way. And we kind of already explored the elements view of the HTML. This is the elements tab, and we know with this selector here, we can inspect the HTML elements and take a look at what the styles they may have right on the left, this right side here. But there's a lot more to it than that, and sometimes I don't want to look at this anymore. I prefer the source code, to be honest, and this is where you can actually start digging into some of the coding of a site if they so allow you to, because sometimes you can traverse all of the script files inside of there if you were to really look. I can see here Netflix has React, and there may be files inside of there. All right, so I can see there's probably some high-level JavaScript going on in here. So if I look at this, there's a lot of coding going on there, and it looks pretty high level to me. There's a lot going on. So that's a bit scary. We don't need to look at that right now, but we have this concept called a console window. And we can actually, inside of this console window, we can actually, this is a real live command line. So we could actually say, okay, what is A? Okay, if I have, so console log, and I want to log something. I want to say hello world inside of my browser. Then if I press that, it'll actually return back to me hello world. It's basically, this is called the console, and I'm logging something to it. So I can interact here with it, and I could just put like, okay, we're going to talk about parameters. I'll say, a number. Well, it's probably going to be undefined. It's going to give me an error saying, Well, I don't know what a number is. It's not defined. I could probably do some arithmetic and say 2 plus 2 equals 4, as well as, 600 times 10 and whatnot. So inside of our browsers, we have an engine that we can interact with a little bit. And we can also use it as a debugging tool, but at the very least, we have a console log that understands, and you'll notice sometimes when there's errors, this console log comes alive. This is giving some kind of error here. The browser doesn't like something here, and it's giving us some information on why it doesn't like it. So this is called the console log in DevTools. And there's many more here, these tabs we'll eventually explore, but that's what the console log is of the browser. So part of DevTools here, and let's try to continue on. All right. So JavaScript console, we talked about that. So this console we can interact with. So all modern browsers, Chrome, Firefox, Microsoft Edge support DevTools, web development tools, to allow us to test and debug. These development tools allow us to work with these technologies we already talked about. So we already established HTML, CSS, and the JavaScript. And it's built right in. So we already kind of discussed that already, but we didn't actually look at this here. So we have different ways here to interact with the syntax here. So we have hello cons. So we didn't look at this, but this is actually built into JavaScript. There's like an API. So it says document get element. So it's trying to traverse that tree and grab some element named hello and trying to get the inner content. So you don't need to know how all this works, but it's just demonstrating that you can actually interact with it more than just what we did. So we have some expression, 5 plus 15 is 20. We have something called a function, and we'll see if we get into that in this module, functions. And then we have a way of calling the function, and then we get the result. So we can do a lot more than what we had already done in our console window. But know what the console is. Console.log. Now we already did a little example of that, but web developers will often need to log messages to the console to make sure their code is working as expected. Now this could be anything from tracing to throwing an exception and giving details onto the exception and what the exception is, to things that are uncaught that the browser just has. Maybe there's a fatal error in some kind of network call. It'll show up in the console. And case in point, I was working the other day trying to trigger some network call based on the page of the state of the page updated, and the logic was wrong. Like there was something I missed, and instead of one network call, it was firing 1 per second. So it was hitting the backend database. If I left it running, it would have triggered maybe 10,000 network requests if I had walked away, and I had to stop it and then make sure where it was happening. There's a bunch of console messages happening, and there was a bunch of things happening in the network tab, and I'll give you context to that right now while I'm talking. If we go to, let me get rid of this panel here. I don't know why that doesn't go away sometimes. There it is. If you look at Netflix and you go to the network tab, if I refresh, you will see a bunch of stuff happening there. You can see kind of a timeline, and there's a bunch of stuff that have loaded up here, and it's still loading, and there's all these network requests happening in the background that you don't see. But at the end of the day, there was only 32 requests, which is not too bad. That's a good performing website. Mine was going over 500 until I stopped it, and I was getting a little worried I was going to knock the internal server down if I had not caught that. Somebody had a question. Go ahead.
Yes, Mike. The log is keeping in any file in the computer or in the server to check like all the problems or situations that happen during the execution of the code?
So the console log itself is the browser engine. It's not logging. It's not logging. Now it's logging to the console. Now, not to be confused with the logging in general. There's many different techniques to log.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, somebody had a question. What is considered a DDoS? Is that a domain-driven? I'm not sure what the context is, sorry. Right, so there's denial of service attack, if that's where you're getting at. Denial of service attack is where somebody tries to target a website like that, and all of these requests, it tries to hit the server with, like, 500,000 requests to bring the server down. Maybe I internally was almost doing that because there comes a threshold where the servers cannot take the amount of requests. If they are balanced in a way that they can handle it, then they'll basically shut off the caller in good organizations. And ones that have security holes and vulnerabilities and weaknesses, they will go down. And often you'll see, and maybe this is not the question, but I'm thinking of denial of service attacks. It happens quite a bit. Some hackers will just point their tools and try to pound a website till it goes down and crashes. Government sites, I think, in the news lately, but it can happen. And I'm not encouraging that by any means. But anyhow, the console log is part of the browser itself. Now, when we talk about logging, there's a science in itself around logging. My God, there's so many different ways on the server and in code. So if you wanted to code capture all the exceptions, there's many ways to do it. There's built-in tools all the way up to companies that handle all sorts of metrics and logging. You would be surprised, I can tell you that, on how much logging is very important out there. And I'll get into that one day. Not right now. Let's finish up. So this is just kind of, not to scare you, but this is basically showing a console log demo. And I can, maybe I'll run this at some point, but it's basically saying that we have a bunch of consoles here. Now, you don't need to know what all these do, but basically it's going to console log loading. It's going to grab the content of the tag, and then it's going to keep saying hello for 30 seconds. Now, we're not there yet to know what all this does, but this basically would show that the document is loading, it has content, and then it's basically setting a delay of hello console for 3 seconds. And that's a way to incorporate JavaScript into a file. Now, if this looks like spaghetti to you right now, that's okay. Your eyes need to get used to what all this is. Don't expect to know what that is. Again, here's a quick little preview of what the console is. We've already looked at it. Mine has a black theme. Yours may have like a lighter theme. There's a way of changing themes. If you want to know how to change it, let me know. I prefer the darker themes. This is what it would look like. It would say loading, hello world, and then there'd be an error right here. It says it cannot find that tag. And then 30 seconds later, it's going to say hello console. 30 seconds later, it's going to keep chugging out hello console. All right, so we can also we can consider the console as a REPL. REPL stands for read, evaluate, print, and loop. So it reads the JavaScript you type in, evaluates your code, prints out the result of your expression, then loops back to the first step. View and change the page JavaScript or DOM. So you can also do that as well. You could if we wanted to try that API, you could potentially in your script change using a selector here. We could change the content in the console. So we've talked about how we can change it how we can modify styles. When we select something, we can modify the value in the background. You've seen before those images all change. In the JavaScript, it's basically programmatically doing that in a way that you can select the element and then change the content of it. And when we refer to this document.getElementBy, there's a whole API that you can tie into that gives you a bunch of features out of the box to add to your syntax. So we could do something like that. So run arbitrary JavaScript that's not related to the page, right? So if we wanted to test some code out in a code playground or try out some new feature that you're not familiar, we could practice in the console for these kinds of experiments. Now you could also, after you get really good, you're going to realize the console is just not enough room for you if you wanted to create a very big code function or method. It's not enough space. But if you want to just play around with some things, it'll give you some information back and let you play with syntax. Such as this, right? We kind of already talked about that example of running this. 5 plus 5 is 15. Here's our function. We created a function that we're gonna go over functions at some point, but basically it's like a method. If you don't know what a method is, it's basically like a piece of code that we can register with the engine that there's something called add. And add can be called. It takes two values, an A and a B, and this is a way of defaulting A to 20 if it's not there. And all we're going to do is return A plus B. That's it. If we press return, it's undefined because it doesn't know what to do with this. And then, but we can call it because now it's registered in memory in our console window, but in the browser we'll know about this because now it's registered as part of the script in memory, and we can actually call add 25 and it will return 25 plus 20 equals 45. Now this is throwing you for a loop. You may not do it. At the very least, it would be A plus B, and you should provide two numbers, 25 plus 20 in that case. But there's a way of defaulting in case that second value is not provided. But just know that you can do some coding like this in your playground, and it will allow you to respond back. All right, so we will quickly take a break after these couple slides. I'll go over the lab, start it. So the script tag, we've already had a style tag, so it's only fitting we have a script tag. So the script tag, so all JavaScript programs can be inserted into any part of your document with the help of the script tag. So inside, now probably you can put it inside of the body, right? It'll interpret that script anywhere in the body, and that will run, right? It'll run on page load. It'll go through and say, this is a script. I'm going to trigger something called alert, and it's going to pop up something. The browser will know through its API what alert is. Ideally, script should go inside of the head tag. So when the page renders, you'll have all your scripts in one place, but you can also do this. One thing to note, though, is that, someone had a question, but I'll get to it after these two slides. Modern markup. So I still remember this, and I have to catch myself. The old way of doing it looks like this. You would have to actually make an extra step. You'd have to say script, type, text, JavaScript, which is opposite of text, HTML. You would have to put it in there, and I still sometimes double take. I'm like, I look at the tags, I'm like, wait a second, I'm missing something because I'm so used to putting this in there. But now the newer features nowadays, the new browsers, it's obsolete. You just have script by itself, which is clean and really nice, to be honest. So the old HTML standard, HTML4 exactly, required scripts to have a type. So usually it was a type like text, JavaScript. It's not required anymore. The modern HTML standards totally changed the meaning of this attribute completely. So in really ancient books and guides, you're going to find comments inside of this as well. It would look like this, and I remember that as well. I remember having to put these comment tags, and it used to be a pain in the butt to do this because you always forget them. And now it's just so much cleaner now. Another thing as well is external scripts. So we need to, if you have a lot of JavaScript code, you can put it in a separate file. Much like your CSS, when your CSS grows, ideally you put it in a separate file. You can call it externally in the same way using that source attribute, right? So we have script, and then we have a source, and then it'll insert all of our scripting into there. And then as well, if we don't have a relative path, which we learned about, relative to our server, our file structure, we can also give it a full URL in the case we wanted to use a external library like Lodash, which is a oh god, it's a list library for dealing with lists and arrays. Lodash. Or is that underscore? There's so many. But if you were to look at something like Netflix and you were to go to the elements of the page inside of the head of the tags, I would assume here somewhere there's some scripts, and there is. And there's a lot of embedded scripts that do something, but there should be some links to other scripts themselves. And now we can see relative links to some style sheets. And then we also see some other script tags. Ideally, they all should be grouped, but there's a bunch of inline stuff it does to the page. But they may not be using any internal. See, I can see their comments here. Okay, here's one here. They're using a script for geolocation. So they're using something there that they're pulling in that does some type of cookie lookup for the geolocation. And that's just giving me some insight into what they're doing. But these are the script tags. Script, source, there can be other attributes, and then you close off the script tag. So you can play around with Netflix if you want. It uses React. All right, so that is done for lecture 1. We'll take a break in a second. Let me quickly look at the lab to start you off. All right, so I did upload it again. I did upload that as well as I did the submission as well. Again, if I'm gonna relook at it, look at the submission. I tried to give an hour at midnight. Sometimes Blackboard, it's kind of, I don't know, the date picker is not, I don't like it too much. If you see that I only give you till midnight, please let me know. I will update it to make sure that you get the full time. So this is a PDF, it's uploaded. So our lab is as follows. We're gonna try to just work with some JavaScript, inserting it. So JavaScript files are not HTML files or CSS. They end with a .js extension. That's for the lower, that's for the question 4 and 5. You wanna link a .js file. And usually, ideally, it could be in the JS folder, but it doesn't need to be. It can be on the same directory as your file. All right, so we'll do a couple simple things to get you familiar with the console. You're going to create an HTML page. You're going to create a script tag, and then you're going to somehow use the console to display these 2 lines here. So if I were to look at that, I would say, yes, we probably are going to use console log. We're going to use what we just learned to do that. So this is about getting set up, understanding where everything goes, and getting us ready for building some more scripting. Exercise 2 is now we're going to create a page. Inside the script tag, we're going to call something called an alert, which is a window alert, and the browser will know what to do about it. So you have to kind of look at the developer guide, see what that is, see how to throw it, and you're going to put some text in there. And on page load, the browser is going to render with that pop-up. Exercise 3 will be the same type of thing, but this time it's going to throw a confirm message. So you're going to get this kind of message going on where you're going to have some text, and internally the browser is going to know that this is a confirmation window. I need to create a OK button and a cancel button. You don't need to programmatically do that. Carrying on, we will, okay, so I don't want to jump ahead here because we're going to talk about variables, but this one involves creating an external linked file. So let's at least try to get familiar with 1 and 2 and 3. And it's 7:20 now. So again, I'm trying to talk for 45 minutes, but we had some admin stuff in the beginning. So let's see if we go to 8:45. Yeah, okay, so let's come back in about, let's come back at 8 o'clock. So half hour, 35 minutes. Okay, so we'll take a break, come back at 8 o'clock, and then do the second portion of the lab, take another break, and then go over the previous lab. All right, so I'll let you guys stretch, do whatever, come back, work on this lab, come back with some context, and we'll go from there. All right, guys? Okay, thank you.
Guys, is anyone there? Can anybody hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Oh, hi, Vaibhav. So, are exercises 2 and 3 fairly similar?
Okay, I haven't checked that yet. I just started doing it.
Okay.
Maybe
It's
someone who has completed those.
okay, no problem. Because they seem pretty similar to me.
Okay.
Did anyone else
Yeah, I guess
complete?
the difference is that one is only a message, alert message, and other is something like a confirmation.
Oh, you're right. You're right. You're right. You're right. Yep, you're right. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.